you mind just pulling out your pockets for me? What's that from? A knife? Have you got a knife on you?
Body cam video captures the chilling moment a 67-year-old grandfather calmly confesses to a double murder.
What's happened today? You've killed two people, okay.
If you thought he was calm during the confession, well, detectives say he just carried on with his day like nothing happened after the murders. We're breaking down everything we know so far, as the British grandpa is expected to learn his ultimate fate very soon. This is Inside the Crime, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Elizabeth Millner. We're in England for this crime. 67-year-old Derek Martin just waltzed into the Sussex police station after stabbing his ex-stepdaughter and her husband. Then after, he took their children to McDonald's as if nothing ever happened.
First hit Chloe with a sledgehammer on the head. And I got a knife and stabbed her.
To understand how we got to this shocking confession, we have to go back to June 9th of 2023. 67-year-old Derek Martin was at the home of Chloe and Josh Bashford. They have an interesting family dynamic. So Derek used to be married to Chloe's mom, Elaine. Here's the thing though, Derek and Elaine divorced before Chloe was born. So technically, Chloe was Derek's former stepdaughter, but he still maintained a close relationship with her, even though he and her mom, Elaine, were no longer together. On June 9th, the day started like any other day for Derek. According to Sussex police, he went to a coffee shop, and then he met up with Chloe for breakfast at the Stonehouse restaurant, before later returning to Chloe and Josh's home. When he was at the couple's home, something in him just snapped. Shortly after noon that day, he attacked Chloe with a hammer, then grabbed a large knife from the kitchen and stabbed Chloe repeatedly until she was dead. Chloe's husband Josh arrived home soon after. Derek approached him at the door armed with a knife. Then he chased Josh upstairs and stabbed him repeatedly before strangling him with a belt or a rope. Afterwards, Derek didn't just run to the police station. Instead, he changed his clothes, went to pick up Chloe and Josh's 4 children from school, and then took them to McDonald's. At some point after the murder, Sussex police say that Derek tossed Chloe's phone into the bushes of the grocery chain Sainsbury's. Then he returned Chloe and Josh's children to their grandmother's house. In a text message to his ex-wife, the children's grandmother, he reportedly said, "Elaine, I'm so sorry. I can't believe what I've done. I know everyone hates me anyway, especially the boys. I hate myself anyway, and please look after the children really well." Derek reportedly urged Elaine not to take the children home, knowing what's behind those closed doors. But before heading to the Sussex police station, it seems he wanted to enjoy the last bit of his freedom, even after dropping off the children. Police say he went to buy beers from a shop in Whitehall, which he drank on the seafront. Once at the police station, he barely walked through the doors before confessing to 2 murders.
What's happened today?
Killed 2 people.
You've killed 2 people, okay. Do you suffer with any mental health? Can I just ask quickly? Sorry? A bit. What's that? Okay. You got anything on you currently, apart from all that property? You got anything in your pockets? Do you mind just pulling out your pockets for me? What's that from? A knife. Have you got a knife on you? Right. So, do you want to stand up for us? The time is now 7:12. Okay, you're under arrest on the suspicion of murder ×2. You do not have to say anything, however, may harm defence if you do not mention when questions and then we shall later align in court. Anything you do say may be given in evidence. The reason for this is that you've stated you've murdered 2 people. Officers have attended your address and have found 2 bodies. Okay, necessity is for your arrest for a prompt and effective investigation via means of special warnings and a recorded interview. Okay, and to prevent any further harm and your loss. You understand all that? Okay.
As you heard from the body cam, officers went over to the Bashford home where they discovered Chloe and Josh's bodies. Then Derek gave detectives shocking details of how he killed Chloe and Josh.
I hit Chloe with a sledgehammer on the head. And I got a knife and stabbed her. Didn't want to stab him anymore. Got quite something on his neck.
Despite laying out in detail how he killed Chloe and Josh, Derek still denied the murder charge. Kind of like here in the US where he pleads not guilty, pretty much Derek says he's guilty of manslaughter but not guilty of murder. He argued he wasn't guilty of murder because of diminished responsibility resulting from a depressive disorder. He claimed he just lost it. A lot more was revealed during trial too. The trial was pushed back nearly half a dozen times, but it finally took place this year, more than 2 years after Chloe and Josh's murders. According to BBC, Derek told a psychiatrist that Chloe was due to pay him 1/10 of the £1,500 she owed him. According to the forensic psychiatrist, Derek was £8,000 in debt, mainly because of his gambling debts. Chloe was helping him pay off the debt every month until the two got into an argument the day of the murders and Derek just lost it on her. Derek reportedly told the psychiatrist he never planned to kill Chloe or Josh, but he felt like he had been used. One investigator testified, "My own impression of Chloe is that she was somebody trying to do her absolute best for her children. She was accepting help from somebody who was effectively putting himself into a paternal type relationship with her, and he was offering help. The relationship was very much two-way. There's a lot of evidence for that. Chloe often thanked Derek for his help. She took him out for meals. She cooked food for him and offered him friendship and companionship. Whatever caused Derek Martin to act in the way he did on the 9th of June 2023, my own view is that it was not about money." In late October, Derek Martin was found guilty of murder. According to BBC, the jury unanimously found him guilty on both counts of murder after 5.5 hours of deliberation. There's so much to break down with this case, and I'm joined now by criminal litigation attorney Nick Brett. Nick, thank you so much for joining me today. Let's start first with this confession. How often have you seen a man just walk into a police station and confess to killing 2 people?
Well, you'd be surprised. It does happen from time to time. In fact, I personally dealt with a case where somebody had confessed. I think, in particular with murder, I suppose there is a recognition sometimes that kind of crime won't go undetected. And obviously, there were 2 victims in this particular case. So, yeah, I mean, I suppose it is unusual, but not unheard of.
And even just as we talk about the murders, they were super brutal. I mean, Derek Martin struck Chloe Bashford over the head with a hammer, then stabbed her to death. Then he stabbed and strangled her husband, Josh, shortly after. I mean, that is just a lot of brutality. But what was your reaction to just hearing about some of the facts of the case?
Yeah, it's a very strange case. I mean, the argument was supposed to be over money, which seems to be unusual, as you say, for such a brutal attack, particularly given that obviously they were quite closely associated with one another. He regularly and routinely looked after their children. So you would have thought there is a sort of a bond there, a familial bond of sorts, albeit I appreciate that there was a slightly odd relationship between the two of them in that he was her sort of former, well, her mother's ex-husband, I think, before she was born. So yes, no, a very strange case.
And are you surprised that Derek and Chloe even stayed in touch, given that Chloe's mother and Derek got a divorce prior to her even being born, that they two still maintained a pretty good relationship, obviously, up until the murders?
It seems very odd, doesn't it? I mean, they apparently used to meet very frequently, have coffee, and I suppose have discussions prior to children being handed over or handed back. There was a close relationship, and I mean, one may never get to the bottom of the motivation, but one wonders whether there was some form of attraction there, but from him to her, or something of that nature that may have led to him to behave in the way that he did.
And that's interesting that you bring that up, too, because I was reading through the reports that one investigator testified that Chloe cooked for Derek and took him out for meals and offered him friendship and companionship, and that whatever caused Derek to act in this particular way back in June of 2023, it wasn't about the money. So it's interesting that you bring that up, given that I was kind of thinking that as a little bit too, that maybe he loved Chloe a little bit more than kind of a stepdaughter relationship. But what's your reaction?
Yeah, I mean that was the first thing that struck me, and I noticed in fact that the lead investigating officer also expressed the opinion that he seemed to think it would be unlikely to be about money. I mean the brutality of the attacks. How can you have lost your temper over such a long period of time? Yeah. Because obviously the 2 killings took place, and there was a period of time between the 2 of them, as I understand it. So, yeah, no, it's an extraordinary case.
And even as we talk about Derek kind of claiming that he snapped in that moment, but it seems like he went to great lengths even afterwards to cover it up. He changed his clothes. He threw Chloe's phone in the bushes. He took Chloe and Josh's children out to McDonald's. He went to have some beers. He did all these kind of casual activities, knowing that he brutally murdered two people even prior to that. I mean, what's your thoughts on the aftermath of these
Yeah,
very
well,
brutal and vicious murders?
I mean, to have picked up the children and then to have taken them to McDonald's. And I think he even then went and took them, did he, to a grandparent's home before, as you say, buying alcohol and then going into the police station to confess and having disposed of the telephone. So it's very, very difficult to get into the mind of somebody, in that kind of scenario, or whether he just after a while thought, okay, well, I'm going to be found out here, so I may as well just go and hand myself in, and then try and claim that there was some form of psychiatric breakdown.
And then Derek Martin also admitted to killing Chloe and Josh, as we know, but he also denied their murder too on the grounds of diminished responsibility. How does all that work? Is it kind of similar to here in the U.S. where it's pleading not guilty by reason of insanity? What is kind of that whole process like?
It's not quite insanity. It's a defence that reduces, if proven, so the onus is on the defendant to prove that there's a recognised medical condition, and that recognised medical condition caused him or her to lose control such that their ordinary rational thought was affected. So the burden of proof switches, albeit on a lower standard of proof, on a balance of probabilities for a defendant to prove that. If he is successful and the jury accepts that there was diminished responsibility. And what that does is it reduces the charge of murder to one of manslaughter. And what that then does is give the sentencing judge discretion. So when you're convicted of murder or found guilty plead guilty to murder or found guilty of murder, the judge has no choice in the UK but to impose a mandatory life sentence and fix a tariff for minimum period of time to serve. With a manslaughter conviction, he does have a discretion, so he could impose a life sentence even though the fine was one of manslaughter, but he has a discretion, a complete discretion.
And so now that we know that he was found guilty of murder, what does that mean come sentencing? When he's sentenced in just the matter of a few days, does that mean he's officially going to be getting that life in prison sentence?
He will get a sentence with life imprisonment, and a judge then fixes a tariff, which is the minimum period of time he must spend in prison before he's ever considered for parole. And that parole decision is taken by an independent body called the Parole Board. And having served that minimum period of time, if obviously he's still alive, I mean, in this case, the defendant is in his late 60s. So if he's still alive at the time that the tariff period comes to an end, he would have to persuade the Parole Board that there is, he's no longer a danger to the public.
And then also in terms of just the criminal proceedings in the UK versus the United States, what are the biggest differences that you've seen in criminal trials in the United Kingdom versus how they are tried here in the United States?
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously process in the United States is somewhat different from state to state, but on the basis of what I've experienced, I think the trial process is relatively similar. One has a prosecution opening, the prosecution calling its case, the requirement of the prosecution to prove its case. The order of proceedings is relatively similar. I think that questions of admissibility of evidence and process are relatively similar. I mean, obviously, the consequences of being found guilty in the United States can, in certain circumstances, be a bit more dramatic than they are over here in the UK, because one has death sentences in the United States, certain parts of it, which we haven't had here since the early 1960s. I think that on occasion, custodial sentences that are imposed in the United States are somewhat more severe than they are here in the UK. But I wouldn't wish to generalise, and I appreciate that, as I say, process is very different from state to state.
And is it pretty typical, specifically in England, for trials to be pushed back so much? I know for this particular murder trial, it had been rescheduled about 5 times, something that, we see pretty often in the United States in the criminal proceedings. But is it pretty typical in England too for trials to
We've
be
had a
pushed back?
big problem here in the United Kingdom since the pandemic. And so there is, the pandemic caused a huge backlog in the criminal justice system, which is still not been ironed out. And so, when somebody is in custody awaiting a trial in the United Kingdom, there are what are called custody time limits. So there is a period of time, usually 6 months, in which really he ought to be tried. I mean, that those time limits can be extended on application. In this particular case, I think that on the basis of what I've read, the delays were to a certain extent caused by the need to get expert evidence. So obviously, the diminished responsibility defence that I mentioned would require psychiatric evidence. So for a psychiatrist to give an opinion, and for the defence to rely upon that psychiatric opinion, and of course the Crown would then call their own psychiatric experts. So I mean, I imagine that the delays were partially caused by that. But we are having trials. I mean, here we had a trial fixed in 2029 the other day. So you're talking about, people being charged with a criminal offence, appearing in a Crown court, and then having to wait another, 3 to 3.5 years before they actually have that trial process, which is extraordinarily unfair, not only on the defendant because of the anxiety that one faces when one is, not understanding what the future will hold in many cases, but also on the victims, people who've suffered quite, badly from being the victims of crime, and then having to wait such a long time in order to go through the process, trying to remember what's happened, and to relive, what are in many occasions quite frightening or life-changing experiences for them. And so, it is a major problem. I'm not sure if you have delays of a similar nature in the States, but it's a big problem over here.
Yeah, and it seems like, over here in the States, we do get trials pushed back oftentimes because of either backlogs or because the defendant wishes. It always kind of depends, but we definitely see it here pretty often
Yeah.
too. And as we look at just what we've learned through the trial, if you were trying this case, if this was your case, what would you have done differently, if you would have done anything differently?
Do you mean if I was prosecuting the case?
If you were defending the case too.
If I was defending the case, well, I mean, one has to go along with one's instructions. I mean, obviously, having confessed to the crime, your um, your options are fairly limited. I think psychiatric evidence of diminished responsibility, where you've accepted your responsibility for actually having committed the crime, what we call the actus reus over here of the crime. So you really are just dealing with the mental element. So I don't know too much about what happened preparation wise. I certainly wouldn't want to criticise anybody else not knowing anything
Right.
about the case. But no, I mean, I can't think I would have done anything particularly differently. I mean, if his instructions were I lost control because I have a psychiatric condition, then I would be duty bound to go and speak to a psychiatrist and obtain a report or get an assessment undertaken to see whether or not what I'm being told by my client is correct. And if there is a basis for it, then obviously I would set about to do everything I could to ensure that that case is presented in the best possible fashion. And whether or not it's successful would depend on a number of different factors, including the quality of the psychiatric evidence, the strength of that opinion, and how my client gives evidence if that's what he chooses to do. And you would have thought he would have to if you're raising a defence of this nature, if that
And I,
helps.
Yes, it does. It does. I think so. I think every, defendant is entitled to know just all of their different options. And then my final question to you is, over here in the United States, when we have sentencing hearings, we have, the allocution where the defendant has the opportunity to give their final words to the judge before the judge imposes their sentence. We also have victim impact statements that the loved ones and family members of the victim can be heard before the courts. Is that kind of similar over in England too, where a lot of people have the opportunity to speak before the judge ultimately hands down the sentence, or is it pretty matter of fact and the judge hands the sentence down and it's pretty procedural and that's it? What's kind of a sentencing
It's
hearing
very
look like?
similar. It's very similar over here. So the prosecutor, the barrister instructed by the Crown, will open the case and will set out the facts. But obviously, a judge will have heard a trial in circumstances where there is a trial, as there was in this case, and so he will be fairly familiar with the facts. And then the prosecutor will introduce what is called victim impact evidence. And so you have a victim, obviously in this case the victims themselves are unfortunately not still alive. But the impact that this has had on their immediate family members, and of course the parents of the victims. Those statements will be provided to the court, and the judge will read them. And then at the conclusion of that process, the defendant's barrister will make what's called a plea of mitigation, and so will address the relevant factors that give rise to mitigation. I can't. It's a difficult exercise in a case of this nature where a defendant's pleaded not guilty and been found guilty after a trial. We have sentencing guidelines which are produced by an independent body called the Sentencing Council, which judges are required to stick fairly religiously by for almost every offence. Obviously, in murder cases, both barristers will draw the attention of the judge to relevant authorities, so relevant sentencing cases which raise principles that are similar to that which the court is hearing. And the judge will then usually give judgment, maybe after a short period of adjournment, and come back and read a judgment out before passing sentence.
Well, it seems like they're very, very similar by your description of it. So it'll be interesting to see what that sentence is, even though we're kind of expecting it to be life in prison when he is eventually sentenced in just the matter of a couple of days. Nick, Brett, I want to thank you so much for your time and your insight into this case and just all the different procedures that go over in England. And I want to thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you very much for having me.
And Derek Martin is expected to be sentenced on November 6th. He's facing the rest of his life in prison. That does it for this episode. Be sure to check out more episodes on the Law&Crime YouTube channel. I'm Elizabeth Millner, and this has been Inside the Crime.